oh you. Don't waste your love, just let it last. 'Cause once.
What's up, bougie foodies? This your girl coming back to you with another great recipe. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to sink my teeth in these. So as you guys can see, these are some pretty thick pork chops, right? We are going to make smothered pork chops today. And if you guys have never had smothered pork chops, you don't know what you've been missing out, but you're about to find out. So we're going to simply season these with some onion powder, garlic powder, some Morton seasonal, and you guys know how I like to do. I like to have all of my seasonings evenly mixed. So I have a jar here that I used to have like garlic powder or something in, and I just mix all of those seasonings together. So when I put it on my meat, it is going to go on evenly. It's not more than one seasoning on the meat, right? And then I'm simply taking my flour and all-purpose flour. I'm going to season my flour. So yes, I season my pork chops on both sides, and I'm also going to season the flour. I'm using regular vegetable oil, and we're just going to simply fry these up. We're going to let them fry, cool down for a little bit before we put them in that gravy. You want to cook these kind of early. That way it gives them at least 30 minutes to maybe 45 an hour to marinate in that gravy, because the longer they sit in that gravy, the more tender they're going to be, and oh my gosh, they're going to be so good. And we're just going to simply pair this with some rice that I'm going to put in the rice cooker. We're going to make some fried cabbage and some cornbread with it. So I hope y'all are ready today. So while we have some of the pork chops frying in the background, we're going to go ahead and cut up our cabbage. Now, however you like it, you can cut it up, but I actually shred my cabbage, okay? So I'll show you guys how it's kind of done. But we're not going to cook this immediately because it doesn't take long for cabbage to cook. So we're just going to shred this up, clean it, let it sit to the side for a little bit. Now, when we do cook this, we are going to cook this in some chicken broth. I'm also going to put in a tablespoon of bacon fat. You don't have to, because the chicken broth is going to give it a nice flavor on its own. I'm also going to do a little bit of salt, pepper, and some blackened seasoning, but it's whatever you decide, but this is how I do mine. So all I've done here is I've cut my cabbage in half, and I shred it like this. Simply like this. Now, I could go a lot faster if I wasn't trying to show you guys and hold the camera at the same time. But this is how I tend to like my cabbage. I don't like it in huge chunks all the time, right? But it's whatever your preference is on this. Now, once I'm done cutting it up, I am going to put it in this strainer, and I'm going to wash it, because as you see here, it's like dirt in there. So you want to wash your cabbage very vigorously. I'm not going to cook it right away because it doesn't take long for cabbage to cook. So we're going to wash it and just let it sit to the side. Now, when I do cook it, I'm going to cook it in some chicken broth, probably about 16 ounces, because it doesn't take much of chicken broth for it to cook down. And I'm going to season it with some salt, some pepper, probably a little bit of onion powder, and blackened seasoning. Now, I'm also going to put in a tablespoon of bacon grease. You don't have to, because the chicken broth is going to give it a nice flavor on its own. But I just love that bacon grease taste in it as well. But of course, if you're vegan or you don't eat pork, you don't want to, you don't have to, whatever your taste buds like. But we'll come back to you after this is done. So as you guys can see, the pork chops are cooking. I've already turned them over to the other side. But this is what you want to achieve on both sides, is that golden brown goodness right there. So it's time to make our gravy, and this here, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the drippings from this to start our gravy. This is goodness. This is from your fried pork chops. You want some of the grease, some of the drippings, right? And we're going to put it in with the flour. Now, I use the same flour that I use to batter my pork chops in, because I like the flavor. I always season my my flour, and I season my gravy, right? So I'm also going to use some chicken broth for this as well. not chicken broth, excuse me, beef broth, right? We're gonna use beef broth to make the brown gravy as well, along with these drippings. Now the thing about gravy is you gotta be very careful about making the gravy, because if you make it too thin and you try to go back and thicken it up, because that's what that flour is for, to thicken it back up. If you do that and then you try to add flour into it later, it can clump up. So if that ever happens to me, I don't add flour into this direct pan. I always do it in a separate pan. That way it doesn't clump up in my pan, in the same pan. And as you guys can see, I'm not using the same pan here. I'm using a different pan because this one is way bigger and it's gonna fit all of my pork chops in here at once. So what I'm gonna do is, I really need to buy a plastic whisk so I don't damage my pans. But yeah, I'm gonna put this in here. Rosie, can you get me the beef broth out? So you kind of want to do like this with it. I'm going to add a little bit more oil and drippings. Look on the shelves in there, please. So someone once told me that making gravy is an art, because not everyone can do it. I somewhat agree with that, because I have literally given step-by-step instructions to somebody before and they still messed it up. So I don't know. It's just something that came pretty easy to me. Okay, so that's what you want to see when you're starting off your gravy. Okay, now sometimes I put onions in here. I don't like to eat onions, but I will cook with onions. So I'll put onions in here and then dig them out. But I don't have any onions today. We got to get some. So we're just gonna add a little bit of onion powder. Do that and whisk this right in, and I'm going to add a little bit more oil with those drippings. As you can see, I can't tell you how much to add. I just eyeball everything, and that's why I do it a little bit at a time, right? So now what we're going to do is we're just going to add in that beef broth. So, give me just a second. We're going to come back. So, some people, when they're making their gravy, they'll use the drippings with the grease and the flour and everything with water. I don't like to use water. I like to use beef broth because it's going to add more flavor to it and it just makes it taste so much better to me. But you're going to want to whisk in all the little chunks of flour. And then that flour is going to thicken up this juice. And I'm actually going to add some more beef broth in. I didn't have the cartons like I normally do, but I had cans. So I'm doing like 3 to 4 cans because I want a lot of gravy. I want those pork chops to soak in that gravy. I want there to be gravy for our rice. Oops, sorry. And I just want goodness. So that's what that is doing. I'm going to let this simmer on low now. I'm going to turn it down to probably about 200 degrees because again I have it in this cooktop pan. So as you can see, the gravy's starting to thicken. But I'm going to put some more beef broth in here, whisk it up, and then I'm going to submerge the pork chops in here. And these pork chops are going to sit in here for about 45 minutes as I'm cooking the cabbage and the cornbread. That way it's marinating in there. It's going to soak in all that goodness. And it's not going to take that cabbage no 45 minutes to cook. The longest thing that's going to take is, of course, the cornbread. And I got to make the rice. So I'm about to put the rice in the rice pot. So what you guys see right here is me doing the process over again for my gravy. And the reason being is because I need it to be thicker in the other pan, but I don't want it to be clumpy since I already have my beef broth in there, right? So I'm gonna do it in a separate pan. And once this browns, I'm gonna add just a little bit of beef broth to this and then put it in the other pan to make my gravy thicker in the other pan. So not too much, just added a little bit more, but a little bit of flour goes a long way in helping make that that gravy thicken up. Come back. So while the rice is cooking and the pork chops are simmering, I haven't yet put on my cabbage yet because again, that's the last thing I really want to cook. Now sometimes I make this dish and I make it with macaroni and cheese versus rice, and I have the cabbage and the cornbread, but today I wanted to do rice. But anyway, while all that is going, we're gonna make this cornbread, and this doesn't take really long to cook. You're gonna just follow the directions on this. My family likes sweet cornbread, so this is already sweet, but I also add like a teaspoon of not even a full teaspoon, like a half of a teaspoon of vanilla extracts, and then I also do like half a cup of sugar to it. Oh my gosh, it is so good. And then once it comes out from cooking, of course I butter it, but I butter it before I cut it, and then when I cut it, I butter it again so that the butter goes down in the cracks, and then I pour honey on top while after I cut it, so the honey seeps down in there. So it is so good. My family loves cornbread this way. They really don't like it any other way. I love eating, you know, like skillet cornbread or Mexican cornbread, but this is the only kind they really like to eat. So that's how I do mine. So we'll get this going. This is the consistency that you want of your gravy. You don't want it too watery, too thick, but this is a good amount of gravy for what I'm trying to achieve, because again, I want gravy on my rice, I want gravy on my pork chops. Like, we love gravy. So this is gonna sit here for like a total of 45 minutes minimum. Sometimes I do an hour, you know, but you want to make sure it's on low heat because you don't want it to burn, right? So I'm about to turn this down and let it simmer. Cabbage on the stove top. Of course, I've got it on like medium heat, because again, it doesn't take long for cabbage to cook. I put half of a carton of chicken broth in here, so 16 ounces because it was a 32 ounce, and I've got a tablespoon of bacon grease. I'm lost for words right now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add some onion powder to it and some blackened seasoning. Do that because I want my cabbage to have like a little bit of a kick to it. Y'all know I like spicy. So do that. Let this simmer. And again, it's not going to take long to cook. This was like kind of piled over the top of the pot, so it's cooked down some. But not long. So we'll come back. You're just gonna let this cook, you know, depending on your liking on how much you want it to be tender. I like my cabbage to have just a slight crunch to it sometimes, and that's what I'm trying to achieve today on it. Of course, you don't want your cabbage to be like mush though either. You don't want it to be too soggy where people don't want to eat it, because then it's disgusting and it doesn't taste right. But anyway, so I'm just going to mix up these seasonings, and as I'm mixing this up, I am going to put some more seasoning in, depending on your liking on how much seasoning you want. But you guys know I like everything to be highly seasoned. And if you don't want to do chicken broth, you don't have to. If you don't have chicken broth, you can definitely use bouillon cubes, or you can do water. I mean, I don't like to use just plain water because I like the flavor to mine. If you don't have bacon grease, or you don't like pork, chicken broth is a great way to add flavor to it. So I don't cook my cabbage unless I have chicken broth in it. But as you guys can see, well, maybe you can see because the steam, but it's starting to get tender, right? And you just want it mixed up because you don't want the bottom to cook and then the top not to. So once this fully cooks, I mean, it's not going to be much cabbage. It was a crap load of cabbage. It's not going to be much. That's the bad thing about cabbage and spinach and greens and mustard greens and turnip greens, things like that. It cooks down. It withers to little of nothing. So you got to buy a lot if you want a lot. Like buy well over the amount that you think you want so that you'll have enough of what you really want. But we've got the cornbread in, and what I actually did with the cornbread is I made them into little muffins versus doing the regular cornbread, pan. But gonna have little cornbread muffins, and our pork chops, I'm really lost for words today, are over there just cooking. So they're simmering, and they're gonna be really nice and tender. What's up, bougie foodies? So this is what your plate should look like. I kind of like to plate mine, make it look very pretty. You don't have to because it's all going to be consumed. But this is our smothered pork chops over rice, cabbage, and cornbread. So if you guys like this recipe as much as we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can continue to enjoy these recipes. Like it, share it with your friends. But definitely this is one of my favorites. I just love how tender they get after soaking in that gravy for like 45 minutes. I mean, sometimes I even do it for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on how many pork chops I have. But of course, the longer they sit in that gravy and simmer, the better they're going to taste, the more tender they're going to be. So hit that subscribe button, and until next time, you guys have a great day.